What Andrew didn't realize was that beyond the busy facade of the hospital, significant behind-the-scenes preparations were underway. The communications team, ethics committee, and hospital administration were all actively organizing to make the arrival of the new chief of surgery a landmark occasion. Dr. Malcolm Wright was stepping into a role poised to redefine the standards at St. James, and expectations buzzed like electricity in the air. Rumors about Dr. Wright circled among the staff. Some hailed him as a surgical genius, while others praised his unwavering ethics and advocacy for fairness in healthcare. However, what remained concealed, and what Andrew was soon to uncover, was that this appointment intertwined with a legacy much deeper than mere administrative shifts. For Dr. Wright, this hospital symbolized more than just a career advancement. It was entwined with a complex family history that many had chosen to forget. Later on, when Andrew found himself summoned to an emergency senior staff meeting, he let out a resigned sigh. These administrative gatherings were far from his priority. He thrived on the front line, making the decisions that he believed truly kept the hospital alive. As he stepped into the conference room, he settled into the back row, his expectations low. The whispers surrounding Dr. Wright were plentiful. Some hailed him as a surgical genius, others praised his unwavering ethics and commitment to equitable medical care. However, what remained veiled in secrecy and what Andrew was about to unveil was that this appointment was tied to something far more intricate than a mere restructuring. To Dr. Wright, this hospital meant more than a fresh career chapter. It symbolized a tangled lineage buried deep within family legacies that most preferred to overlook. Later, when Andrew was summoned to an emergency senior staff meeting, a heavy sigh escaped him. Administrative meetings were low on his list of priorities. He thrived on the front lines, believing his decisions were crucial to keeping the hospital operational. As he stepped into the conference room, he had little expectation, choosing a spot in the back row. His mind was preoccupied with strategies for reorganizing shifts for the upcoming week when the crowd's whispers began to intensify. The hospital director, a woman known for her serious demeanor, took her place at the head of the room and for once flashed a rare smile. "Colleagues," she began, "it is my pleasure to introduce our new chief of surgery, Dr. Malcolm Wright." All heads turned to the entryway as a tall man with a commanding presence strode in confidently. It took Andrew a heartbeat to recognize him. It was the same man he had seen in Triev, still dressed in the same attire, now crisp and tidy, but undeniably familiar. A ripple of conversation swept through the crowd as Andrew's stomach tightened. Dr. Wright approached the front, his gaze locking onto Andrew with unnerving intensity. The room fell silent as Dr. Wright began to speak, his voice resonant and steady. He articulated his ambitions to revitalize the surgery department, outlining his vision for a more compassionate and inclusive approach to care. Then, unexpectedly, he directed his focus toward Andrew. "Before we proceed," he said, his tone cool and measured as he met Andrew's eyes, "I'd like to recount an experience I had earlier today, right here in this hospital. I felt invisible as a patient, treated with indifference, hardly acknowledged." Andrew's face burned with shame as whispers filled the air, colleagues casting quick, uncomfortable glances in his direction. In the midst of all this, I sat in Triev, gripped by intense chest pain and completely overlooked. Dr. Wright's voice remained calm, but the weight of his words was undeniable. It wasn't that resources were lacking. Someone simply decided I wasn't worth their time. Andrew stood in his defense, but Malcolm interrupted, raising a hand. "Dr. Wright, he began, but Malcolm quickly shut that down. "This isn't about defending yourself. What's important is that we address how no one should ever be treated like I was. We're here to save lives, not to determine who deserves care by their appearance," he asserted. The room fell silent, the atmosphere thick with tension. Andrew felt stripped bare, as though all his flaws were laid out for everyone to scrutinize. The humiliation washed over him like a tide. Each pair of eyes felt heavy on him, each whisper echoing his shame. Malcolm's voice broke through the silence, strong and steady. "This hospital is part of my history, longer than most of you realize. I grew up around here, that story for another day. For now, we must ensure no one else feels erased in this space. As Dr. Wright wrapped up and stepped away from the podium, Andrew felt a tightness in his chest, the world around him blurring. It was just the start of a long, unexpected journey where he'd confront not just the new chief of surgery, but also his inner struggles. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m., yet St. James Hospital pulsed with life. Dr. Andrew Collins sat at his desk, hands tangled in his hair, reeling from the day's revelations. Dr. Wright's words lingered, blending with the quiet beeps of heart monitors and the muffled conversations from the emergency room. A heavy cloud of shame loomed over him, suffocating and intrusive. Deep down, Andrew realized he had messed up. It wasn't the first time he judged someone based on looks, but the fallout had never been so exposed. Now, every action felt measured, every glance from his coworkers tinged with unspoken judgment. He understood the consequences awaited him, but what gnawed at him most was that his behavior was now under scrutiny. The next morning, discomfort wrapped around him like a shroud as he navigated the hallways. Nurses and residents exchanged hurried looks, sometimes avoiding his gaze altogether when he drew near. The air was thick with tension. To compound his unease, Andrew had a meeting looming with Dr. Wright and the hospital director. As he stepped into the meeting room, he spotted Dr. Wright already seated, his seriousness palpable as he studied some documents. The director, positioned at the table's head, offered a formal smile. "Andrew, thank you for coming," she said, attempting to lighten the mood. Dr. Wright acknowledged him with a nod, still focused on his papers. There was an unsettling coldness about Dr. Wright, a poised control that intensified Andrew's nerves. He greeted both of them, forcing a smile that quickly vanished as he settled into his seat, the oppressive silence amplifying his discomfort. Finally, Dr. Wright looked up, locking his gaze on Andrew. "I've been reflecting on what transpired yesterday," he began, his tone calm but resolute, slicing through the tension. "What we need to address here extends beyond a mere error in judgment. It's about our values, how we treat our patients and one another," he continued. Andrew swallowed hard, the urge to defend himself stifled by the weight of accountability. Any justification would likely feel inadequate, and Malcolm wasn't there to entertain excuses. "I'll be straightforward," Dr. Wright went on. "We must enact substantial changes in our operations, starting with personal accountability. I recognize that the emergency department is a whirlwind, and we'd all face immense pressure, but we cannot excuse discrimination under any circumstances." The director cast a reassuring glance at Andrew, who felt the gravity of their words. "Andrew, we know you're a capable doctor with a reputation for delivering results," she said. "However, the events of yesterday cannot go unaddressed. As leaders, we must exemplify the standards we expect, which includes extending care and respect to everyone," she added. Andrew nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of what was being conveyed. "I understand," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's no justification for what happened. I made a mistake, and I'm committed to making it right." Dr. Wright studied Andrew closely, assessing his sincerity before finally responding. "It's reassuring to hear that," he said, though lacking much enthusiasm. "You'll need to attend training focused on ethics and inclusion, something deeper than our standard courses. I expect you to fully engage with it, Andrew. We need genuine change." "Of course," Andrew replied, striving to sound resolute even as he felt diminished. The sting of being reprimanded by a peer he had misjudged still lingered. "And one last thing," Dr. Wright added, leaning forward. "We'll navigate this together. I want you to join me on a few shifts in the surgery department. I want you to witness how we handle various types of patients. It might help expand your understanding." Andrew nodded, aware that this experience would serve as another painful reminder of his shortcomings. "Understood," he replied, his voice barely steady. The weeks that followed felt like an ongoing trial for him. Working with Dr. Wright was more than just doing his job. It was a daily lesson in humility. Malcolm was a natural leader, his movements deliberate and confident. His communication style brought clarity and inclusiveness to the team. Malcolm never raised his voice, yet commanded respect effortlessly, an authority that felt rightfully earned. For Andrew, it was a stark departure from his own method, which relied heavily on pressure and relentless efficiency. During one surgery, Andrew observed Malcolm skillfully guiding a nervous resident. "Take a deep breath," he encouraged softly. "We all make mistakes when we start." Malcolm emphasized the importance of staying calm and focused. "Let's try again together." Watching this unfold, Andrew felt a tightening in his gut. Each act of kindness from Malcolm only magnified his own shortcomings. He lost track of how many times he had scolded residents for minor errors, often in front of patients, without considering the weight of his words. Later that day, Andrew witnessed Malcolm approach a group of patients in recovery. One elderly man, clearly confused and agitated, looked lost. Without a moment's hesitation, Malcolm knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Thompson, how are you feeling today?" he asked with a warm smile. The man met Malcolm's gaze, appearing a little more at ease, and began sharing stories about his granddaughter's upcoming visit. Malcolm listened with genuine interest and patience. Andrew, close enough to catch the exchange, felt a rush of embarrassment. It had been ages since he had simply sat with a patient to listen. On another shift, while reviewing charts in the break room, Andrew overheard two nurses chatting. "Dr. Wright has really transformed the atmosphere, hasn't he?" One said, "I've never seen a doctor so passionate. It's like he genuinely cares about everyone, not just the patients." "I know," the other replied, "he makes it seem effortless." "Have you noticed how he treats the cleaning staff with the same respect he shows to the other doctors?" Andrew felt a pang in his chest. Despite his extensive experience, he recognized that something vital had slipped away from him. It wasn't merely surgical expertise that distinguished Malcolm. It was his capacity to see every individual as deserving of respect. The days went by, and Andrew started to feel shifts within himself. Though hesitant, he found himself listening more to his patients and asking questions he would have once dismissed as pointless. One afternoon, a young patient arrived in the ER, showing signs of an overdose. Instead of passing the case to a resident, Andrew chose to take it on himself. "Are you scared?" he asked the young man while preparing the medication to counteract the drugs. The boy, eyes wide and glossy with tears, nodded. Andrew inhaled deeply, revisiting Malcolm's teachings in his mind. "It's okay," he said, softening his tone. "You're not alone. We'll get through this together." This moment, though small, marked a significant development for Andrew. He still had a long journey ahead, but he was starting to grasp that true competence was about more than healing ailments. It involved treating people with dignity and compassion. On a chilly Saturday morning, a feeling of unease stirred within Andrew upon waking. The overcast sky seemed to echo his troubled thoughts. Since Malcolm had joined the hospital staff, Andrew's days had been filled with painful lessons and unsettling self-analysis. He tried to maintain focus, but the memory of the emergency room incident lingered uneasily in his mind. Malcolm, a model of professionalism, had led Andrew to see their relationship as complicated, far exceeding the boundaries of a traditional boss-subordinate dynamic. That day they were scheduled for another shift together, this time for a challenging surgery. Arriving at the hospital earlier than usual, Andrew hoped to prepare himself mentally for the long hours ahead. As he strolled through the corridors, he caught the cautious greetings of staff who acknowledged him with quick nods, lacking their former warmth. He realized his reputation had taken a hit. Although he was actively working to mend it, the journey was proving slow and painful. Upon entering the operating room, he found Malcolm reviewing scans alongside the surgical team. Malcolm gave him a brief nod of acknowledgement as Andrew joined the group, doing his best to focus on the intricacies of the upcoming procedure. They were to remove a complex tumor from an elderly patient, an intricate task that would demand the team's full expertise. Throughout the surgery, Andrew closely observed Malcolm's every movement. He executed each step with precision and calmness, guiding the residents with a clarity that Andrew couldn't help but admire. The operation went smoothly, and when it concluded, Malcolm removed his gloves, a small smile breaking through as the residents celebrated their success. "Good job, everyone," Malcolm said, addressing the team. "This was a tough surgery, but you kept your composure. That's how we should approach every case, with patience and focus." Andrew held his tongue but couldn't shake off the mounting respect he felt for Malcolm. That day, he witnessed something unique, a glimmer of humanity and leadership that transcended mere technical skill, rooted in the power to inspire trust in those around him. Once the surgery was complete, Malcolm approached Andrew while they cleansed their hands. "You're making progress," Malcolm said, shattering the silence. "I've noticed you've been making an effort to really listen to your patients." Andrew, momentarily taken aback, nodded and aimed for a neutral expression. "I'm trying, Malcolm. I think I'm starting to grasp what you meant about the importance of care." Malcolm acknowledged this with a nod. "It's a promising beginning. We all have our lessons to learn, Andrew. I've had my share of missteps as well." He paused, seemingly contemplating something profound. "But the key is to not repeat those mistakes." Andrew picked up on an unspoken weight in Malcolm's words, sensing there was more beneath the surface. An unfamiliar tension hummed in the air between them. Before Andrew could respond, a nurse entered and announced that the hospital director wished to see them both in her office. Upon their arrival, the director sat at her desk, her expression one of clear concern. "Andrew, Malcolm," she began, "there's a sensitive matter we need to discuss. Please have a seat." The two exchanged a fleeting glance before taking their seats. The director retrieved an envelope from her desk and handed it to Malcolm. As he opened it, the gravity of its contents transformed his demeanor, the seriousness of it etched on his face. "Is something wrong, Dr. Wright?" Andrew asked, doing his best to mask his unease. Malcolm fixed his gaze on Andrew, an intensity in his eyes that left Andrew feeling uneasy. "There's something important I need to share with you," he said, his voice unusually subdued. "Something I've recently uncovered, and it changes everything." A shiver crept down Andrew's spine as he frowned in response. "What is it?" he pressed, sensing the weight of Malcolm's words. Malcolm paused, as if selecting each word with care. "Andrew, do you remember your father's name?" Taken aback by the question, Andrew replied, "Of course, it's William Collins. Why do you ask?" Malcolm inhaled deeply. "My full name is Malcolm Collins Wright, and William Collins was my father too." Time seemed to halt for Andrew as he processed the revelation. He stared in disbelief. "No, that can't be true," he stammered, feeling as though the ground had suddenly shifted beneath him. "I thought the same thing," Malcolm replied, maintaining his composure. "But I did some digging, searched for records and documents." He continued, "William had a relationship outside of his marriage with my mother, and he left before I was born. I grew up without knowing him, and it was only recently that I discovered who he really was." You're saying I'm your half-brother." Andrew struggled to find his voice, his mind spinning as he gripped the arms of his chair for stability. The director observed them closely, anticipating their reactions. Malcolm added, "This changes everything, Andrew. I never expected to be working alongside my half-brother, and honestly, I didn't expect to feel like a stranger in a place that should feel like home." Conflicting emotions surged through Andrew: anger, shame, confusion. His image of his family had always been clear, but this revelation sent it spiraling. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Andrew's voice quavered. "Because I needed to be sure," Malcolm replied, emotion thick in his tone. "I wanted you to see me as a person beyond just my role as a doctor or chief of surgery. I needed you to understand the life I had without our father, without the privileges you had." Andrew felt lost, torn between denial and the unsettling reality Malcolm presented. Part of him wanted to push away this notion, but another part of him, the one beginning to confront his own imperfections, couldn't dismiss the truth. "I don't know what to say," he finally whispered, feeling more exposed than ever. "You don't have to say anything right now," Malcolm said, rising to place an envelope on the director's desk. "I'm not here to dispute a past we can't change. I want to help make Street James a better place for everyone, and I hope you'll join me in that mission." Andrew looked at his half-brother Malcolm, a man he had prematurely judged and overlooked, unaware of the complexities of his life. A new sense of responsibility weighed heavily on him, not just the demands of his job, but also the desire to mend a family connection that had been fractured before it truly began. "I want to do this right," he said, his voice steady at last, whether in the hospital or in their relationship. I want to learn more about you, Malcolm, and I want to be part of this. Malcolm nodded, his face softening for the first time since their paths had crossed. That's a start, Andrew replied, a flicker of hope sparking within him. Let's start fresh as brothers. As they exited the office, Andrew felt an unfamiliar blend of optimism and anxiety about the unknown ahead. He understood that the journey would be challenging, filled with hurdles and adjustments, yet for the first time in ages, he sensed he was heading in a promising direction. In the days that followed this revelation, Andrew experienced a tumultuous mix of tension and reflection. He continued his shifts at the hospital, but the feeling of being constantly scrutinized lingered. Malcolm's words replayed in his mind, "Let's start fresh as brothers." It felt like both a commitment and a challenge. Andrew was resolute that he would find a way to navigate this, both in their familial ties and professional lives. At the beginning of the week, the hospital buzzed with an unusual intensity. An accident had sent a wave of critically injured patients to the emergency room. Together, Andrew and Malcolm found themselves in the surgical wing, tackling the most urgent cases. Working side by side, their exchanges were few, but an unspoken bond grew as they both focused on saving lives. While preparing a patient for surgery, Andrew caught a glimpse of Malcolm out of the corner of his eye. He was meticulous, his hands moving with notable skill and assurance. Malcolm had a gift for easing patients' fears even before anesthesia, offering soft words and genuine smiles. Andrew, who traditionally preferred a quiet approach focused purely on technique, began to recognize the value of Malcolm's empathetic demeanor. After hours of demanding surgeries, the brothers finally took a break in the doctor's lounge, both visibly drained. The silence between them lost its earlier discomfort. It seemed they were each grappling with their own thoughts. "You have a different way of approaching things," Andrew ventured, finally breaking the quiet. "I'm not sure I could be that patient with every single patient." Malcolm offered a small smile. "I learned early on that how we treat people significantly impacts their recovery. Sometimes, all someone needs is to feel heard and respected." Andrew nodded, contemplating how his interactions with patients had subtly shifted since observing Malcolm's approach. It was a gradual evolution, yet already he began to notice small improvements in his attitude. Nevertheless, the shadow of their past still loomed over him. "Do you really think things can change around here?" Andrew asked, glancing at the medical charts scattered on the table. "I mean, for everyone? It isn't just about us." Malcolm leaned in, resting his elbows on his knees. "It'll take time. Think of it like a complex surgery. Patience and attention to detail are key. Cut only what's necessary. Stitch the wounds properly. But yes, I believe change is possible." A flicker of hope stirred within Andrew. Maybe there was a way not only to mend the rifts between them, but to improve things throughout the hospital. Just then, a nurse entered, announcing that more patients were arriving. They both sprang into action, returning to their work. Andrew focused on applying what he was learning from Malcolm, consciously setting aside his biases to adopt a more compassionate approach. He wasn't perfect, but each small step felt like progress. Later during the night shift, as Andrew pored over patient records at the nursing station, Malcolm approached with a pile of papers. "I want to show you something," he said, placing the documents in front of Andrew. There were old medical records connected to cases of neglect Malcolm had seen throughout his career. In each one, Malcolm had chronicled how he would have addressed the situation differently. "These are from my residency," he explained. "I made many mistakes, some of which still weigh on me. I learned that the system isn't flawless and it's up to doctors to recognize and correct those flaws." As Andrew flipped through the records, reading Malcolm's candid notes, he felt a profound connection. "Have you always been this reflective about your work?" Malcolm shrugged. "Maybe it's because I've often felt like an outsider, both in life and in medicine. I couldn't afford mistakes without pondering their consequences. My mother taught me that for us, even a minor error can lead to significant repercussions." A lump formed in Andrew's throat. He'd never had to consider how he would navigate his career. Suddenly, he viewed everything from a new angle. "I never had to worry about those things," he confessed. "I always thought that being good at my job was enough." "And you are good, Andrew," Malcolm replied, locking eyes with him. "But good isn't enough. We must strive to be better, especially in roles that impact so many lives." Andrew nodded, feeling a mix of guilt and resolve. He knew he needed to work diligently to overcome his biases and regain the trust of his colleagues. Thanks to Malcolm, he had the opportunity to start fresh. Something Andrew came to realize was truly rare and valuable. In the following weeks, the collaboration between him and his partner began to catch the attention of the other team members. Some remained doubtful, particularly those who had witnessed Andrew's previous behavior. Yet others started to recognize the authentic changes he was making. Andrew consciously worked to listen more and took the time to focus on each patient, even amidst the mounting pressure. One afternoon in the emergency room, a young mother rushed in carrying her 3-year-old son, who was experiencing a high fever and seizures. As Andrew was nearby, he heard the desperate cries of the mother, pleading for help while she desperately held her child. The other residents were preoccupied with their own cases, and it would have been easy for Andrew to defer responsibility. But something compelled him to act. "Come with me," he said gently, guiding the mother and her son to one of the beds. He reassured the mother, comforted the boy, and made sure the necessary tests were carried out as quickly as possible. The mother was in tears, but Andrew remained by her side, explaining each step of the treatment process. Malcolm, watching from a distance, noticed the transformation in Andrew and smiled discreetly. Later that day, Andrew was called in for a meeting with Malcolm and the director. Stepping into the room, he felt a tinge of nervousness, still aware of the scrutinizing gaze of his colleague and the expectations tied to his new role. The director welcomed him with a smile. "Andrew, I wanted to take a moment to commend you on your recent efforts," she said, casting an approving glance at Malcolm. "We're witnessing real progress, and it's a testament to your commitment to improvement." Andrew expressed his gratitude, feeling a wave of relief wash over him, though he understood that much work lay ahead. Standing beside him, Malcolm nodded emphatically and added, "This is just the start, Andrew. We still have a long journey ahead, but I have faith we're on the right track." As the meeting wrapped up, Andrew and Malcolm walked down the quiet corridor together. The hospital was beginning to empty, and for the first time in weeks, Andrew felt a sense of calm settle over him. He glanced at Malcolm beside him and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Malcolm," Andrew said, pausing for a moment, for everything, for believing in me." Malcolm responded with a warm, genuine smile. "We're in this together, Andrew. We'll keep pushing forward as a team." Andrew nodded, feeling that he had finally discovered a deeper sense of purpose in his work. Although the path ahead promised its share of challenges, having Malcolm by his side gave him the strength to face anything that came their way. Dry leaves crunched underfoot in the parking lot of St. James Hospital, creating a soft carpet for those who passed by. It was autumn, and Andrew couldn't help but feel invigorated by the crisp air around him, a refreshing shift he was starting to recognize within himself. The weeks since Malcolm's revelation had flown by, and the hospital seemed to echo the changes underway, not only in its policies but also in the attitudes of those who worked there. Each morning, Andrew awoke with a revitalized sense of purpose. Though the shadows of his past loomed large, he was determined to refuse their hold on his identity. He understood that he needed to invest in improving his relationships, whether with colleagues, patients, or especially with Malcolm. However, at last, the journey of rebuilding was beginning to flourish. That day, Andrew arrived early at the hospital for a pivotal meeting. The team had orchestrated a special event to officially launch the new Inclusion in Medical Ethics training program, an initiative Malcolm had passionately supported since joining. Proudly, Andrew found himself alongside Malcolm on the committee, working to design the program and rallying colleagues to get involved. As he walked into the hospital auditorium, a twinge of nerves stirred within him. The seating was filled with doctors, nurses, administrators, and other staff members, all eagerly awaiting the presentation. Andrew's gaze shifted to the stage, where the director was gearing up to address the audience. He spotted Malcolm standing nearby, and his half-brother offered a brief, encouraging nod that Andrew deeply appreciated. The director commenced the event with an impactful speech on the significance of the hospital's transformative efforts. She emphasized Street James' commitment to exemplifying inclusive care and respecting every patient, irrespective of their background or social circumstances. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for Street James, she proclaimed. We're here to celebrate the dedication of all those who made this possible. Dr. Wright, would you please join us? Malcolm stood and made his way to the podium. With a composed yet resolute demeanor, he addressed the audience. Thank you, Director, and thank you all for being here today. I stand before you not only as the Chief of Surgery, but as an individual who profoundly believes in our collective power to effect change. He paused, locking eyes with Andrew. When I first arrived here, I recognized the challenges ahead, but I also saw a united front capable of overcoming them. What we celebrate today isn't merely an inclusion program. It represents a commitment from every individual in this hospital to strive for improvement and excellence. With that, Malcolm passed the microphone to Andrew, who inhaled deeply, preparing to step onto the stage. He scanned the audience, feeling the weight of their attention. Yet this time, it was not shame that filled him, but rather a sense of hopeful determination. It all boiled down to responsibility. As Andrew began sharing his story, his voice calm and composed, he reflected on his early days in the medical field. I used to think being a good doctor was solely about skill and efficiency, but I've come to understand that it encompasses so much more. It's about how we treat our patients, how we look beyond the surface. I've made my share of mistakes, moments that forced me to change my perspective, and it's thanks to the guidance and patience of people like Dr. Wright that I'm here, poised to be part of the transformation. Andrew spoke candidly about his journey, emphasizing the necessity of acknowledging our shortcomings to grow from them. He recounted how Malcolm had pushed him to not only be a better doctor but also a better person. When he finished his speech, the audience responded with enthusiastic applause, but what meant the most to him was the warm smile from Malcolm. Later, they found themselves in the hospital cafeteria enjoying a coffee together. Seated at a corner table, they watched the casual bustle of a typical day at Street James in silence. This shared moment of tranquility had become a source of comfort for Andrew. Malcolm eventually broke the silence. I really believe we're starting to make an impact here. I've noticed improvements in the care reports, and the team's morale is definitely on the rise. Andrew nodded, a slight smile breaking through. Yes, there's still much to be done, but it's encouraging to see progress. Malcolm regarded Andrew, his expression softer than usual. And how about you and me, Andrew? How do you really feel? Andrew paused, taking a deep breath to gather his thoughts. It's a journey, Malcolm. Managing these changes and coming to terms with our family's truth has been tough. But I'm making an effort. I genuinely want to learn more about you, to understand your story. I think we owe it to ourselves to have that opportunity. Malcolm returned his smile, one that seemed to lift the burden of many unspoken years. I want that too, Andrew. We can't undo the past, but we can create something new together. In the months that followed, Andrew and Malcolm collaborated closely, evolving from colleagues to brothers. They encountered obstacles and sometimes disagreed on decisions, but there was always a bedrock of mutual respect that had been absent before. Andrew discovered the value of listening, being present, and cherishing every life he encountered in his work. One afternoon, as Andrew sifted through some reports, Malcolm walked into his office, looking pensive. "We need to talk," he declared, shutting the door behind him. Andrew raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Malcolm pulled up a chair and took a seat. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the future. I've had some proposals from other hospitals to lead initiatives similar to what we're working on here." A tight feeling gripped Andrew's chest. The thought of losing Malcolm, especially now that they were finally growing closer, weighed heavily on Andrew's mind. "Are you thinking about leaving?" he asked, striving to keep his voice calm. Malcolm quickly shook his head. "I haven't decided yet. It's tempting, but I feel like we still have work to do here," he replied, a smile breaking through. "I don't want to leave you to handle this alone. There's so much we can still achieve together," Andrew responded, relief washing over him. "Malcolm, Street James needs you." I need you too. We're just beginning to see the fruits of our labor, Malcolm affirmed, nodding in agreement. I know. That's why I'm staying. At least for now. But remember, no matter the distance, we're a team from here on out. And more than that, we're family, he added. Andrew felt a warmth blossom in his chest at those words. For the first time, he felt he had a brother, someone to rely on, someone who understood him and pushed him to grow. With gratitude and hope shining in his eyes, he smiled at Malcolm. Then let's keep moving forward, Andrew said, reaching out his hand. Malcolm met it with a firm and genuine grip. As brothers, they rose together, stepping out of the office, eager to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. At St. James Hospital, now driven by the bond of two united brothers, the future looked tremendously promising. St. James evolved into more than just a place for physical healing. It became a beacon of redemption, inclusion, and transformation. Through their intertwined journeys, Andrew and Malcolm demonstrated that even the gravest mistakes could be mended with humility, showcasing that compassion is the ultimate key to true healing.